Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of the updated ICMM Water Reporting Good Practice Guide. My name is Aidan Davey. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at ICMM, and I'll be moderating a panel discussion today between the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, Actiam, which is a major Dutch-based asset manager, an ICMM member company, and an ICMM association member on how transparent water reporting can drive progress on responsible water management for the mining and metals industry. So as part of the session, I'm going to start by providing some very brief observations on the external context around water reporting and transparency, and ICMM's response to these issues through an update of the water reporting guidance. Then I'll briefly describe what the ICMM guidance aims to achieve and our members' commitment to its implementation. Then we're going to move into the panel session, where each of our panelists will share their perspectives and experiences. And I intend to protect time for question and answers from the audience towards the end. So can I ask you please to submit any questions to our panelists via the Q&A function on the platform. So just by way of context, water, as I think we all know, is a critical resource for the operation of mining and metals assets. ICMM's formal commitments relating to transparency of water use and management date back to our water stewardship position statement, which was approved by our Council of CEOs in late 2016. Now, at that time, in recognition of the importance of water transparency for our industry, the position statement included a number of commitments for all members, and that included and I'm quoting where it says to apply strong and transparent corporate water governance. And that includes publicly disclosing the company's approach to water stewardship. And it also includes publicly reporting company water performance, as well as the material risks, opportunities, and the management response using consistent industry metrics and recognized approaches. So that was our commitment back in 2016. And at that stage, it was increasingly apparent that many operating assets faced varying degrees of water-related risk, and that these were in part driven by climate change, but that these risks were becoming more prevalent with potentially quite significant impacts on operations from both an environmental, a social, and an economic standpoint. In parallel with all of this, we had growing investor scrutiny and a clear drive towards increased disclosure that had led to increased reporting demands from investors. And overall, the demand was for greater transparency and disclosure on water use and management, not just from investors, but also from others with a significant interest in the responsible management of water. Now, from ICMM's engagement with key stakeholders at that stage, we had a very clear ask for consistent, comparable, and transparent disclosure on water governance, as well as a focus on the use of water and risk management, which ultimately enables investors to better understand value at risk. Now, in response, we engaged with our members to develop and launch the Practical Guide to Consistent Water Reporting back in 2017. And since the launch of that guidance, we've actively supported the substantial efforts taken by our members to progress their internal practices, to build their capacity, to promote peer-to-peer learning and exchange around water management, and to improve the consistency and quality of their external reporting. But since 2017, the external water reporting requirements have also evolved. For example, GRI launched its revised Standard 303 Water and Effluents back in 2018, which included a stepwise increase in water reporting requirements, and to which all our members are required to report as a condition of membership. In addition, we had CDP launching their tailored water security questionnaires for specific high-risk sectors, which included mining and metals. And beyond these external developments, it became clear that some of the metrics from the 2017 guide were open to different interpretations, which ran contrary to our goal of consistent water reporting. So taking all of this into consideration, we began the process of updating the water reporting guidance in late 2020, with a focus on firstly reviewing the ICMM minimum reporting commitments against those of relevant external reporting platforms. And secondly, with a view to enhancing the supporting guidance by really drawing upon the insights and the learnings we had gained during implementation of the original guide and supporting work. And so the revised version of the guidance, the Water Reporting Good Practice Guide 2nd edition, which we're launching today, is now available on the ICMM website, and it very much is designed to support the industry's commitment to consistent reporting. Through its application, companies will provide a more comprehensive picture on their water risks and opportunities, and they can demonstrate that they're responsible water stewards and respond to calls for more and increasingly granular data. But that's more than enough from me by way of introduction. What I want to do now is move into the panel discussion, and I'm delighted to have with us 4 very capable, qualified panelists who can take us on this journey around a conversation on water reporting. And firstly, we've got Alexis Morgan with us from the WWF, and Alexis is Global Water Stewardship Lead at WWF. Secondly, we've got Nadia Fransen, who's the Responsible Investment Officer at Actiam. And as I mentioned, Actiam are a major Dutch investment manager. We've got Brianna Gunn, who is Director of Environmental Affairs at Newmont Corporation. And then last but by no means least, we've got Chris McComb, who's General Manager of Sustainability from the Minerals Council of Australia. And Chris, a special thank you to you for being with us at what is a pretty antisocial hour for you back in Australia. So let me start by turning to you, Alexis. So from your vantage point as the Global Water Stewardship Lead within a major international not-for-profit that's renowned for its commitment to resource conservation, I'd like to understand, why corporate water transparency is so important from your perspective, and how do company water disclosures support the work that WWF is involved in?
Sure, thank you, Aidan. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be joining everyone. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think when it comes to water, what is interesting about it is it's a resource, it's a shared resource, and it's ultimately valued by different parties in different manners. And, we've been involved in the space on water because of its importance to people and nature and other reasons for that. And we've been engaged on issues of water risk to mobilize companies. But it's this issue, the fact that water is, to some people, an economic risk and opportunity. To others, it's a fundamental human right. To hopefully everybody, it's a fundamental human right. But to many others, it also has spiritual value, various other values. And so providing transparent information really allows people to share information in a manner that's consistent and can be interpreted. And I think that sharing of information is actually quite fundamental to an exercise of not only understanding, but trust building and relationship creation. So I think that's really quite critical and central in the whole piece of this. Yeah, I mean, I would sort of provide that at the outset. I think, from a WWF perspective, we work with companies a fair bit on this issue of water stewardship and engaging here. And really for us, understanding where companies are at in that journey, not just their exposure on risk and so forth, but the evolution of their stewardship response from, good management to a more strategic approach to how they're managing water is something that's actually quite important. And so as an advocate, we're also very interested in seeing where companies are at on that journey, understanding kind of how far they're moving along. And it's also, in fact, important for us to be able to evaluate companies and understand who we want to partner with, who we may not want to partner with. And so those things are actually, quite important. So in summary, I would say ultimately, transparent information is really quite critical to, providing a common basis to be able to provide a consistent and accurate evaluation. And regardless of how you're approaching water and why you value water, that's a consistent common need as an investor, as a stakeholder, as a local community, or as a peer business.
You've written extensively on this whole issue of water stewardship, Alexis, going back quite a few years now. Be good if you could share some of your observations on corporate disclosure around water, in the last 3-5 years, say. And again, to understand from your perspective, to what extent do you think companies are meeting the expectations of the users of this information? And then on a related point, it would be good to understand what gaps you see. And interesting to learn, do you think that the work we've been doing at ICMM will help to address those gaps?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting evolution. I mean, I've been involved with CDP's water disclosure as an advisor, and I was involved in the GRI 303 revision as well and the development of it. And there's been certainly many of the aspects that are reflected in the guidance I think are reflected back in that evolution and changes. The growing push towards context. I was really happy to see in the recent updates, just an increased emphasis on things like climate scenarios, which are increasingly going to be in the mix. Elements of thinking about water strategy, and that water is not simply a risk; it represents an opportunity. And I think the mining sector and the extractive sector as a whole has actually been quite good at thinking about how opportunities can be harnessed in the mix of all of this. So I think there's some really interesting things there. I mean, the overall trends that I think are in this space at this point are many of the things that there's who are attending here probably are well aware. I think there's growing levels of water disclosure as a whole. We're seeing more players engage in this. And a greater scope of disclosure. So not just direct operations, but increasingly within value chains and those sorts of things. I would say the push towards asset level disclosure continues. That's something that I think we're going to still see more of. There's certainly been more, and a pretty massive in the last few years, a much more just a stronger interest on behalf of everybody from ESG data providers to investors, and also seeing this again, not just as a risk issue, but an opportunity. So, that's reflected in the growth of green bonds and many other aspects. I would say that, one of the things that I'm seeing is that there's still a lot of companies that are quite focused on this sort of angle of responding on risk and ESG. And, the ESG angles, what I think is interesting is that the ICMM disclosure guidance and the new water reporting guidance is probably a step ahead of where the ESG community is at still, which I think is a good thing, because hopefully it will shape the direction of some of what they're thinking of on this. And I think that there is a fair bit of still reporting fatigue that's out there. So as we go forward, I'm hopeful that we can get fewer but better metrics perhaps within this space, because I don't feel like the ESG community is handling this issue particularly well. Water, they're not picking up on strategy, they're not really picking up on opportunity to the level that I think is needed. So I think that the guide takes a real step in the right direction. Aligning standards is going to be really critical as we go forward, and there is efforts afoot on that. And these pieces of kind of strategy, opportunity, asset level scenarios, and so forth, I think are really going to be at the center of where we go from here.
Great, thanks so much, Alexis. Maybe one last little point, because we're always kind of keen to understand how we can do better. Are there other sectors that you look at and think they're doing a really great job that we can perhaps learn from within the mining and metal sector?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I point to the mining and metal sector as one of those sectors that others can learn from, because I do think that there's been some really good efforts to try to enhance transparency and asset level disclosure and other things like that. I mean, one of the other sectors that I think does have its act together as a whole, albeit from perhaps a different driver perspective, is the apparel sector. There's been common standards that have been developed around discharge that have been adopted within supply chains, which I think is quite progressive, but they've generally developed pretty consistent facility monitoring metrics and other elements of that. And there's a number of sort of sector groups that are the analogs of ICMM who have been really working to develop improved monitoring, reporting, kind of guidance, similar sorts of things. But I think it's another sector that does have its act together as a whole on this issue, and is trying to advance some of the issues on that front. I think the issue where and it's always a challenging one, because context matters, and it matters a lot for mining as much as it does for other sectors, but is going to be, I think, around these consistent impact metrics, which I think we see at a facility level on things like discharge levels and so forth, and getting consistency on that. But increasingly, I think one of the interesting things is that you are going to have facilities that are located in basins where it's not just mining that's going on. There's a whole array of different things, and increasingly one of the trends that I would say also that we're starting to see is that we're going to need to see performance and impact at that basin level. And that's going to require a common set of metrics for those basins. So then it becomes not just a sectoral reporting piece, it's actually intersectoral. And so I think there's some challenges still that we're going to need to cross as we go forward on that, because this issue of what is truly the status of the basin and how are we progressing against the status of that basin is going to be critical for everybody who's relying upon the water in that basin. So it's not just my chunk of it or my performance, but it's collectively our performance, and that's going to require alignment across sectors as well. But I think we're a stage away from that one still.
But really, really interesting, and it brings you right back to your opening, remark about this being a shared resource and therefore intrinsically challenging when it comes to those shared spaces at the basin level. Look, really, really great. And by the way, I note you did mention a particular observation on the ESG sector. Maybe that's something I'm going to pick up with Nadia a little bit later on, so I'll give you advance warning of that, Nadia. But for now, I'm just going to turn to you, Brianna. And Brianna's Director of Environmental Affairs at Newmont Mining. Talk to us about Newmont's water reporting journey. What's changed in the way you've approached this? And why is measurement and disclosure on water management so important for Newmont?
Thanks, Aidan. I appreciate it. I just thought I would take it back a little bit. In about 2014, Newmont had a large number of events related to water, both around conflict, around delays in development of projects, around unplanned expenses. And this really led to us developing a way that we wanted to manage risk, and that's our global water strategy. So the global water strategy for us is a framework for how we view water, really valuing it as a shared asset for all, as Alexis was alluding to. And part of that, a big part of that, is measuring and accounting for water use. So understanding this in the context of the watersheds in which we operate, really understand what are those risks that exist around those and what are the mitigations that we need to have. We believe that it's really, truly important to be transparent about our water usage, both from a water quality and a quantity standpoint, because it really aligns with our values, but also builds credibility with our stakeholders. So around that time, as we began to develop our global water strategy, we worked through the process of building a template for our water accounting. And we used the MCA template that exists as kind of our overall format and started to implement that in 2016 with our sites. We continue to use that, as well as external consultants, to help us develop and provide training and guidance for our sites. As we've moved forward, we've been able to progress it a little bit, linking it to our existing systems that we also have, like our site water balances, our online tools that we use in terms of looking at metrics. We use it as a way to understand trends and opportunities for improvement. The process has been really important for us to be able to set efficiency targets, to be able to understand where we have areas of potential improvement, to understand where we have potential mitigation that we need to do, and really to reduce our overall consumption, as well as to meeting the objectives that we set in our global water strategy.
So you've been intimately involved in the development of this guidance, Brianna, and I know that it's involved a heavy lift on the part of the membership to get us to this point. And one of the things that it's intended to do is to address misalignment across the membership on water reporting. So it'd be really helpful for you to say a little bit about how the guidance is going to help address areas of misalignment. And then on a related note, accepting that there are some areas that we want to see better alignment, how has reporting on water in the past 3 years, say, since we introduced the original guidance, led to results? And other signs where we're seeing our efforts really bringing returns, whether that's kind of for the community, for the environment, or indeed for companies.
Thanks, Aidan. So I think it's been a long journey. I think we started talking about reviewing and updating the guidance quite a few years ago. There were a number of discrepancies really in the way that companies were reporting externally on the information that we had in terms of water, really specifically around water consumption. And what we decided as a group was that it's really important, specifically in areas that don't have sufficient water, like in a water stress area, to really understand how are companies managing things? How are we being resilient? What is our actual approach to what that is, so that people could understand that the water availability, what we're taking as a company, isn't the entire water that's available in that watershed. So we spent a bunch of time comparing and talking through how each of us were reporting and what that looked like, and tried to use that as a framing guidance for how we should move forward. So what's happened with the guidance, I hope moving forward, is that we've been able to align and provide a little bit of flexibility for how companies actually put the information in, but to be able to have something that is way more comparable and transparent than we previously had. So from my view, the guidance really does provide that flexibility in the approach of what we're doing, but also provides a lot of clarity for how we can put that information in, how it compares to other frameworks like GRI, and it really promotes consistency across different mining companies. We also took some time to engage to see where companies were in their process of being able to meet the water stewardship position statement. And there were some gaps, but it was also a good way to see where companies needed to work to advance. And that helped us to work on the guidance too, and identify places where we can move forward. I really believe that understanding water consumption at the site and regional level will help drive our understanding and impact of maintaining water as a shared resource. And it really does help us to align with either our internal strategies that we have, but as well as the ICMM position statement. And as I said before, I think being able to have this information out there allows us to understand where we can be more efficient, put in those different types of projects, really develop and describe externally what are our management approaches, both in terms of providing resiliency to ourselves, as well as providing resiliency in terms of the entire watershed as we move forward.
Great. Thanks, Brianna. Let me turn to you now, Nadia. And I guess, from your vantage point as an investor with a very deep commitment to sustainable investment, and that's hardwired into Actium's organizational vision and mission, be good to hear from you what information you're looking for from companies when it comes to their management of water to help guide your investment decision-making process. And then linked to that, how does the ICMM guidance help to meet these requirements?
Yeah, in our screening approach, we often screen companies on a combination of exposure to water risk and management of these water risks. So for exposure, we have drafted a list of sectors that we think are exposed, and the mining and metal sector is, of course, in this list, both due to the risks of not having enough water, but also due to the impact the sector might have on water availability. So because it is regarded as a high risk sector, it's actually all companies within the sector are assessed by us on water risks. And what we then first do is to look at geographic risk. So how much of the revenues does a company retrieve from water scarce areas? And this is especially relevant for the mining sector, I think, because normally a sector has the potential, of course, it's very difficult and it might entail cost, but has the potential to relocate its operations. But for the mining sector, of course, you are dependent on what's in the ground and where it is in the ground. So you cannot simply relocate. So this geographic risk is extra important for the sector. And then once we have an overview of this risk, what we do is look at how the risks are managed. And this is really an overview of all kinds of factors. So we look at policies a company has and how these are integrated into the general operations of the company. We look at whether the company has set targets, and what's most important is how these policy and targets align with a risk assessment a company has conducted. So whether the company has looked at where its operational risks are most profound in the field of water, of course. And what we have already heard from Brianna and Alexis, like where those locations are that are in water scarce areas, and how a company goes about that. So whether you see a company engaging with other stakeholders, aligning its targets with what that specific catchment or region needs, etc. So that's really one side of the picture. And then the other side, we also look at water pollution. So what is the water discharge? Is this monitored? How are tailings dams operated, etc. So combining these exposure and these management indicators, that provides us with a score, and based on that we determine whether Actiam can invest in a company or not. I think the ICMM guidance could really help providing this information. Of course, it has some of the general indicators in there already, like what is the level of water withdrawals or water consumption, etc. So that's already really useful, because we currently, we do still see gaps in reporting, even though, yeah, as Alexa said, we also acknowledge that it has improved already over the last couple of years. We still don't see a lot of companies that really report on all the indicators that we are looking for. So we hope this can be provided by the ICMM guidance, also in a more standardized way. And what I think really helps is that the guidance also provides explanations to companies on how it should report or how it should measure specific things. So what to in or exclude, what regions or what operations to focus on. So that can really help to really prioritize those areas where it's needed most. Maybe a last point, what I think is important here is also for companies when using this guidance, is not only to focus on the quantitative indicators that are in there, but also really pay due attention to the more qualitative side, the narrative surrounding this, because the quantitative indicators are important. It's important to know how much water a company extracts, but providing the context on that is even more important, I think, because it really makes a difference whether that amount of water is extracted in a water scarce or water abundant region. And that also already provides us insight in whether the correct measurement management techniques have been implemented, whether it indeed prioritizes the right basins and implements the right techniques.
Thanks, Nadia. It'd be interesting maybe to take a slightly closer look at that, the investment decision-making process you go through. And from a water perspective, you've given us a sense of the things you look at, but it'd be good to know, what are the real potential barriers to investment when you come to look at an investment opportunity from the perspective of water.
Mm-hmm. I think two things. We have recently conducted actually a risk assessment on our portfolio, on the general portfolio, so all sectors, but also the mining sector. What we found there is that there is quite a good awareness of the potential water risks, and that companies are actually doing quite well in monitoring such risks. But we did see that progress is still needed on actually the transparency on water consumption, the target setting, etc. So more on translating this policy into practice. And also we saw that the mining sector is actually among the sectors with the highest number of controversies. It's of course also related to its operations. It might be more sensitive. But that exactly that could be a barrier for us to invest. We all like when policies are great, of course. That's really the basics that you need. But then these policies should also be translated into practice, and you should really be able to see that a company is committed to its policies and really implements it in the right way as well. And a second thing, and that's also related to this implementation, and it has also been mentioned before by the speakers, is that we want to see a local approach in this implementation. On a global level, of course, we are still within the planetary boundaries of water, so we don't really have a problem. But on the local level, these problems really do exist, and there are plenty of regions that are water scarce. And what we still often see is that companies set a general target, like we want 15% reduction of water use in our operations. And of course, that's great, but when you have this 15% reduction in a water abundant area, it does not have that much impact. And instead, when you have it in a water scarce area, then it can make a difference. So it's really this translation that we want to see, and also the explanations on this translation. So yeah, it's our advice would be to not to focus too much on the overall promises, but really state like, this is what the local environment needs, and this is how we cater to those needs. And that's really what we are looking for. And without that, it can still be that policies are great, but that we wouldn't invest in a specific company.
Great, really helpful, Nadia, and very clear. And listen, just before I turn to the last of the four panelists, can I remind everybody that you do get an opportunity to ask questions. If you post them through on the Q&A function now, that's the way we're receiving them. That way we can come to those in a couple of moments. I know we've had a number already, but it would be great to see others coming through as well. And certainly I have lots of questions, so I have no doubt that the attendees today do as well. Chris, let me turn to you. And again, you know, General Manager on Sustainability now at the Minerals Council of Australia, but I know you've led on water-related matters for many years now within the MCA. So taking you back a decade now since you first published the Water Accounting Framework back in 2011, you know, MCA has kind of, I think, been at the forefront on water accounting and disclosure. It'd be great to know what motivated the development of that Water Accounting Framework, or as it's sometimes referred to, WAF, and how have you seen reporting evolve in this space over the last decade?
Great, look, thanks, Aidan. And look, before I begin, I just want to say hello to everyone. Good evening and good morning, etc. But also my congratulations to the ICMM team for the production of what I think is a fantastic piece of guidance. It's going to put the industry in good stead for many years to come. But look, just reflecting on, I guess, our own journey in water accounting here in Australia. Look, the development of the WAF, if I could call it that, was really catalysed by crisis. So like so many innovations, in particular, the Millennium Drought in the late 1990s to the mid-2000s, it very much shaped, I guess, the Australian narrative around water. It heightened the recognition of the multiple values of water, the environmental, social, cultural, and economic values, and drove, I guess, a national plan or a national strategy to support sustainable and equitable water sharing arrangements in the face of an extremely variable climate, and a climate that's becoming more variable. While we always recognise the importance of water as an industry and as a critical business input, I guess the crisis served to really heighten our focus on the risks and the opportunities, as well as the interaction of industry water use with surrounding water systems, and in particular, other water users. And lastly, and this probably comes as no surprise, industry water use is heavily scrutinised by our stakeholders here in Australia, government, our local communities and others. And our ability to communicate water use and other interactions was becoming increasingly important to trust in our sector, and I guess to use the phrase, our social license to operate. At the time, we realised also that we didn't have the tools to understand industry water use and requirements effectively. It was difficult to compare apples to apples, if you like, between companies. To be frank, it was difficult to compare apples to apples between operations, perhaps even within the same company. And that really affected our ability to communicate, to benchmark, to manage risks, identify those opportunities, and really importantly, to drive improvement. And I guess we undertook a review at that time, and it became very clear that the tools to enable us to do so either didn't exist or they weren't fit for purpose for our sector. So we recognised that we needed to get out on the front foot, and I guess the development of the WAF, an industry-specific framework, was our response. Our objectives were, I'd like to say, were very simple, but they were very complex. It was really to develop a consistent accounting approach that worked for the sector, accommodated the complex interactions the industry has with water, understand our reuse, our efficiency, if you like, but also be adaptable, scalable, being able to apply it at the operational scale. And I should say here in Australia, it gets applied at that scale, gets applied at a regional scale, and obviously feeds into the corporate reporting as well. And also, and importantly, it needs to be able to be understood by our stakeholders. And while it was a simple concept, I guess accounting is a simple concept, it was really quite a task. And I suppose any of the folk that have been involved either in the development of the WAF or certainly the ICMM guidance know that it's a big job. Water accounting is a significant intellectual exercise, but also it requires significant effort and discipline to implement across the membership. It's hard work to roll this stuff out. I probably just reflect, I suppose, since we adopted the WAF in 2011, I guess the water reporting space has become increasingly busy. Water use, who is using what water and how much, I suppose, has become a big focus for governments and communities. Furthermore, water risk and of course opportunities and the management of such has become increasingly a focus of investors. And this has driven the growth in a plethora of water reporting requirements, new water reporting initiatives, and more detailed disclosure. I think maybe to Alexis's point before, certainly those stakeholders are looking for more granular data and potentially more operational level data. But I might finish there.
Great, thanks, Chris. Look, thanks to all of the panelists, incredibly kind of helpful, I guess, starting observations on the questions we've had already. But I want to turn now to some of the questions that have been coming in from participants. And there's a number of these, and they do connect to a couple of the points that have been kind of cropping up in some of the remarks you've made already. And maybe if I can start with one that's come through, and again, I hope I kind of do justice to the questions. There's a question that's come through, Nadia, and I think it's sort of directly related to your world. And the ask there is, has there been work done to set sector-specific benchmarks for water use? And is that something that the investment community is looking at, or indeed is that something that the investment community might see value in having?
Yeah, I think there is work done already. It's not yet at a level that it really has like this standard format for all sectors in all regions. Of course, it is something that we take into account. We always consult different sources to see what is important for which sector. So yeah, that's very much regarded. What we do see there is also because of the complexity of the issue, is that this often is still pretty high level, so to say. It really focuses on what is your water use, what policies do you have, what targets do you set, and this still needs to be translated then by the company itself towards the operational side impacts. But for example, you do have CDP as a very important one who has a questionnaire, and this is already framed with different questions to different sectors. Also, you have, which is more general and not specific on water, you have the SASB framework. Of course, ICMM is one focusing on the mining sector. So yeah, there is plenty of information, and this of course is used by investors. But more work is there to be done, and I think this is also done. I know about some initiatives that are really focusing right now on looking into what are the most important sectors which have the highest impacts or the biggest risks in the field of water, and which are really going to deep dive in those sectors. So I think the developments look promising. But yeah, we are still on a path towards an ideal situation.
Thanks. Now, did anyone else want to come in on this point? In which case, I'm going to move on to a question that's come in around reporting water disclosures on an asset-by-asset basis, or indeed on a mineral-specific basis. And so the question really is, why are we seeing, a delay in reporting, asset-by-asset disclosures, and what's being done to address this gap? And can we expect the industry to move into this area of asset-by-asset disclosures, or indeed mineral-specific disclosures? And if I may, then a related question, just to kind of bring two together, is there a value proposition in asset-by-asset level disclosures, or indeed do asset-by-asset level disclosures provide the insight, provide additional insights beyond what you would get through aggregate disclosures of some sort? So, Brianne, I'm going to give that one to you first, but I suspect others may want to come in on that. So if you do, panelists, please do just raise your hand.
Thanks, Aidan. So I'm going to I'll answer this definitely for Newmont, and I can try to answer this for others because we already do report asset level data for water, but we did have this discussion a lot when we were working on updating the guidance. And just some companies, I'll be completely honest, are more mature in their water reporting journey. So they've been able to develop more detailed information on an asset level. Some are not, but that I think is where all of us are looking to go in the future, is to be able to develop and look at that. And I think one of the reasons that it's important to do that is because water is so location specific. So when you're doing and reporting, when you do it on a conglomerate level, it's important to look at intensity and metrics across the entire company. That's definitely important. And that's one of the reasons that we worked on the guidance, having an overall consumption and making sure that's comparable. But when you're at a specific location, it's really important to be able to take into the context of what's happening for water availability and potential impacts at that level. And so I think that that's why we've really tried to transition to looking at it at an asset by asset level and working toward that. So I think you'll continue to see more companies advancing in that specific area. But there are a number of ICMM member companies that are already reporting at that asset level.
And I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in on this one as well.
Alexis has his hand up.
Hey, Alexis, go for it.
So I would just build on Brianna's point. I mean, I think we're going to see it increasingly by, not only the mature players, but the mature sectors. And I think the mining sector is likely to be the first to really break that boundary, so to speak. It's just got a sufficient level of maturity and understanding of water issues that it's likely to kind of move into that space. But, there's also critical mass. You can't, if you're trying to get sectorally consistent reporting, as Brianna says, there's players that are very much prepared and ready for that, and there's players that are still very early in that journey trying to get their stories together. But there's no question it's very, very advantageous to those who are using the information, because there's such a better ability to understand and talk about context in that case. And I think it's actually to the advantage of companies to be able to do that too. And picking up on kind of the other question before, if once you're getting into regional benchmarks, you might be able to do that in certain ways, but ore bodies change so drastically from location to location, regardless of water scarcity or not, that there's a lot of interpretation that's required to actually get at that. And so I suspect asset level disclosure will help to move towards that through time. But I do expect it to happen. I just think it's a kind of a progression pathway that we're seeing.
Right, so it's a case of when rather than if. Thanks, Alexis. Chris, you wanted to come in on this one as well?
Oh, look, I'll just be brief, Aidan. Look, I think it certainly does occur here in Australia, but perhaps I would suggest it's probably not common. That said, we have some fantastic examples of regional based accounts being produced. So multiple companies getting together to develop a single account. Obviously, the future would, of course, be something that works for all sectors versus just working for our sector. We did look, and I think ICMM a couple of years ago looked at commodity specific sort of metrics and targets and so on, and that's a real look, that contains a whole lot of challenges, because it's really about location and region versus necessarily a commodity as such. It's certainly in our experience here in Australia.
Thanks. Nadia, I know you want to come in on this one as well.
Yeah, also maybe being really brief. I align with Alexis's point. It's going to be incredibly difficult to have really this area location specific focus for all of your operations and all of the different mining techniques used. So I think also here it's not the ultimate goal to report every detail of every single asset. Like you don't need 5 pages per location per asset. I think at least as investors, what we are looking for here is mainly to see that the companies do conduct this risk assessment on a localized basis within their operations, and that they cater to those risks, and that they really know what to prioritize and what to do in order to have this balance in a catchment. And then of course you need some level of some degree of asset level exposure to show this commitment, but it's not from our side that we expect tens of pages per asset and per location, because we are not going to read that for thousands of companies in our portfolio. So I think the main thing here is to remember that you show how your processes are taken care of and how you prioritize specific areas over other areas.
Thanks, Nadia. Switching gears now, we've got a question that's coming around the issue of reporting fatigue. And I know, Chris, you touched upon this in your remarks. And the question is, what's being done to address reporting fatigue and encourage the implementation of strategies, templates, and guides that are under discussion? So how do we translate kind of policy into practice, I guess, in a way that somehow manages to overcome the challenge of multiple reporting demands and requirements? So it'd be good to maybe get your take on this, Chris, but I suspect others will want to come in on this one.
Absolutely, Aidan. And as a fellow association, we know the chagrin of our members when we look to develop new reporting requirements and standards and the like. But look, I think on in the water space, certainly for our sector, I'm happy to report that the left and right hand are all talking to each other, and I think it's working reasonably well. There's great consistency, obviously, between the WAF and the ICMM reporting guidance. In terms of where we take that next, well, I guess I see the industry in a position of leadership, I suppose, as it relates to water accounting. And I think we have also sort of got to a point where we have a critical mass of companies that have adopted a particular approach. So I think really it's up to us now to engage with the users of our data, to build confidence in what we're doing and understanding in our approach, but also up to us to engage actively with other reporting standards, but also other sectors as well, to avoid reinventing the wheel. I hate to see a situation where we have a region and different sort of accounting approaches applied to different sectors operating in the same region, which provides little help if you're trying to undertake a regional approach to managing water. But look, I'll stop there and leave it to the other speakers.
The others, Alexis, I was in two minds as do I give this to you first or to Chris first? So over to you.
No, just a very brief remark, which is picking up on a remark that Nadia mentioned, I think we're going to also see an increasing drive towards materiality of specific operations or specific sections within the value chain as well. And so it won't be trying to get reporting on everything, rather, trying to reduce reporting fatigue by saying, look, focus on the places that matter the most. If you have a single operation and this mine represents 60% of the revenue that's being generated, that's what we want to see, right? Or something like that. So I think we'll see increasingly, and there's a lot of efforts, other people mentioned on the call already, that there's efforts underway to try to identify the key parts of the value chain. So I think that's where we're also going to try to, that would be my guess as to how we'll also address some of the reporting fatigue.
Great. Brianna, you wanted to come in on this one.
Just quickly, I think it's worth mentioning that when we were developing the guide, that we looked at MCA, that we looked at GRI, that we looked at ICMM, that we looked at a few other areas, and we did try to combine them where possible and find alignment across them. And I think a lot of us, as Chris mentioned, we were kind of far down a road. So we, we wanted to have that flexibility for companies that were more mature to be able to continue down the road that was working for them, but to be able to allow consistent comparison between other companies. So, but we did spend a little bit of time looking at other areas and see where we could combine and or just add a footnote and or just slightly change what we were doing to make sure it aligned with both. So that is something that we talked about when we were developing the guidance.
Thanks, Brianna. Brianna, while I've got you, there's a question that's come in that asks, at some point in the future, are we going to see these reporting systems being certified? And maybe if I broaden that, beyond the certification of a reporting system, are we going to see the data they generate being assured? And I guess in some ways, the future may already have arrived for some companies.
Yeah, I guess, and I can really only answer this for Newmont, but we've been assuring our data for quite some time. And it's part of our annual process. We assure our entire report, but also specific data areas. And water is one of those data areas that we focus on because it's material for us. But external assurance is being done by quite a few companies, especially as part of the annual sustainability reporting process.
Great, thanks. It'd be interesting also to get some of the panelists' perspectives on this. From your perspective, how important is it that data that's coming through on water reporting have that third-party assurance, additional layer of kind of certainty?
I mean, I'm happy to make a brief remark on that, which is, I mean, it is, as Brianna said, I think there's already a lot of the consulting and accounting firms that are doing a lot of that assurance already on things. There are also a lot of different certification systems that get into the details of certifying the data, certifying the actual disclosure kind of components. There are elements of that already that are in play. And so we might see more of that. I'm not sure it's going to truly help a lot more on the quality of the data. I think trying to get greater consistency and better understanding of how to actually gather that data and almost training staff is probably going to be as important as certifying the data. But I think we do have an array of tools already in that space that we need to just simply embrace as the case may be.
Great, thanks, Alexis. Chris.
I'll just chip in with a minor comment. Look, we are seeing it more and more. However, I think we need to be careful that that assurance, let's face it, it can be very costly for companies and so on. It isn't always accessible to all. So we wouldn't want to see it become a barrier, for example, for going out and having a good go at understanding your water use, developing accounts and so on. Consistency over perfect accounts, at least in the first instance, was a strong driver for the WAF, and that maturity and that improvement would then therefore occur over time. So just avoid it becoming a barrier would be my only message there.
Thanks, Chris. We are rapidly coming up against the barrier of time because we will have a hard stop in about 5 minutes' time. So with regret, we're not going to get through all of the questions, but I do want to kind of finish really on a final question for all panelists. And maybe if I could ask you just to take a minute to think about this. So, we've talked today about the work that we're just launching around enhanced consistency around water reporting, which I think is fantastic. And obviously there's work to be done in that space to now bring all this into effect. But from each of your perspectives, it would be good to know, what do you think is the next frontier in terms of the responsible use and management of water for this sector? Because we recognize the work is not finished at this this stage. We recognize there's a constant evolution in terms of mining and sustainability issues and the responsible management and use of water. So maybe just a minute or less from each of you on what you see the next frontiers being for our sector to get our arms around. And Nadia, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, I think something that has not been mentioned yet today, but what I think is really important, and yeah, this could be considered as a next frontier, is how water management and water risks and impacts are interdependent with risks and impacts and policies on other topics, for example, climate change or biodiversity. Or when you look, for example, at biodiversity, clearing vegetation due to the commencement of mining operation, for example, could have a huge impact as well on water cycles in the region. So in that case, you might not be extracting a lot of water from the region, but still altering the water cycle and altering the water availability in that specific region. So I think a lot of good work has been done already in the field of water management, but we should also still carefully take into consideration how water management interacts with other topics. And yeah, it is also goes the other way around, of course. The key, the solution to water management could also be through ecosystem restoration, for which water is kept within the basin, the natural capacity of the basin to clean water is enhanced, etc. So I think water should be both a separate topic on which a lot of focus is placed, but also be placed within a wider perspective.
Thanks, Nadia. Alexis.
So I will rattle off 4 very rapid things. One, I think we're going to see a push towards multiple models to be used for assessing water scarcity and those sorts of things. And consistent with that, a move towards climate scenarios in the evaluation of water. So that would be 1. 2, an increasing focus on strategy in particular, and really starting with water strategy and understanding what a business's water strategy is and how it links to their business kind of growth and strategy, and linking that through to improved ESG. Thirdly, we've already kind of talked a bit about asset disclosure already, but this issue also of consistent catchment reporting and consistent catchment impacts, and that are common and shared between sectors. And then lastly, the point that Nadia just picked up on, greater integration between biodiversity, climate, and water, and how those pieces begin to kind of merge together.
Thanks, Alexis. Chris.
Thank you. Look, I think the other speakers made some fantastic comments. I guess we've got to this point where we now have systems and a good and a framework in which to understand our water use. But really importantly, this is about informing our ambition. That isn't the ambition itself. So I think now it's up to the industry to start to get ambitious, start looking at outcomes and looking at ways that we can demonstrate those outcomes. The second piece I'd probably just mention is perhaps at a practical level, we need to ensure that we have the right expertise within the industry to drive those outcomes as well. And that's not just the water technical expertise, but it's those integrated disciplines that were aforementioned, the social disciplines, the broader environmental disciplines, biodiversity and other things, because we really have we've gotten to this point, and I think there's full recognition that water is a linkage between all these different things, and therefore we need to have the right specialization, the right expertise in companies to enable us to manage it accordingly.
Thanks, Chris. And Brianna, final word to you.
Thank you for that. And everyone has pretty much mentioned the areas that I wanted to go over, but I really do think that we need to continue to use the tools for accounting, really looking at both the operational and regional level, using that to understand our risks and the impacts that we have. And that really forms the foundation of where we put in our management practices and how we work to identify efficiency measures. But as Alexis pointed out, we need to utilize that also as a tool to what we should be doing at a catchment level. And really how we can promote and support collective action and management of those. And I also agree definitely with Nadia, what thing we're working toward is really how do we integrate those targets and objectives that we have long-term around climate to what we're doing around water and nature as well.
Great. Brianna, thank you. I'm acutely conscious we have indeed run out of time. So it just remains for me to say a huge thank you, firstly to our panelists, who I think have provided extraordinary insight and been incredibly open in the interactions we've had over the past hour or so. I also want to thank all of you who joined the call, particularly those of you who pitched questions, and my apologies to those of you who we didn't get to answer your questions. But as a final point from me, do please access the guidance we've been talking about today. It's available on our website. It's accessible to any mining company to use, completely open source. Beyond that, it only remains for me to say a big thank you to all of you for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And watch this space. There's clearly unfinished work to be done on water, and we look forward to advancing that over the coming years. Thank you for participating.